Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now we're on a dirt road in western Arizona, and throughout this area in the late 1800s and early 1900s, a number of mining towns popped up, and most of them disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Well, today we're heading to one such town, one that's been called one of the best ghost towns in Arizona. So let's head down this road and visit the ghost town of Swansea. We are currently north of Bouse and east of Parker, heading away from any paved roads or modern towns. A silver lead ore deposit was discovered in this area in 1886, but because of how remote it was, transportation was hard and mining was limited. At that time, some ore made it to Swansea in Wales for refinement, and in a coincidence, the town we're heading to would end up being named Swansea for that town in Wales. Things changed out here in 1904 when the Arizona and California Railroad was being planned between Wickenburg and Parker. A consortium called the Signal Group purchased claims in the area that would become Swansea in 1904, with the idea that the railroad would make it easier to transport copper that had been discovered in the area. In 1908, they brought in a man named George Mitchell, an investor and metallurgist from Swansea, Wales, who purchased 132 claims in the Signal Group, and the company was consolidated as the Clara Gold and Copper Company. Mitchell was the principal promoter for the mining company, and he named the town Swansea after his hometown. The town's post office opened in March 1909, and the 1910 census had 400 people living in Swansea. It's said that the town's population would eventually reach as high as 750. The town featured saloons, restaurants, general stores, a dairy, a movie theater, and even an automobile dealership. But Mitchell was a better promoter than a miner, and the company was built on sensationalism and reckless speculation, which isn't a good foundation for a town. There's a pretty interesting arch over there. I'm not sure if that's natural or man-made. Here's a little bit of the old road. Thankfully, this bridge has been bypassed. We just parked, and this place is bigger than I expected, or at least more spread out. There's mining stuff in that direction. There are some buildings over there, and then down below me, there are some ruins as well. So let's start exploring this place. There's a lot of byproduct of copper mining all over the place here, but I'm going to head through here and work my way downhill. So I'd mentioned that Mitchell was a better promoter than a miner. He was doing a lot of things that would impress investors rather than improve the mining operations here. And so at one point, production of the copper cost about 15 cents a pound here, but only sold for 12 cents a pound. So when you're losing money on every pound of copper you mine, it's not really a great business. People in Arizona were aware of how poorly the business was run and that it wasn't a successful company, and so the stock for the company in Arizona would trade for pennies. But in Europe, they weren't aware, and the stock would trade for $3.50, $4 a share. For example, they spent $3 million on a smelter, which wasn't something that was necessary, but it was something that was impressive to investors. But you can only lose money for so long, and in 1912, the company went bankrupt. We'll get back to Mitchell a little bit later. The bankruptcy wasn't the end of his story here. More companies came in and tried to mine here, and there was some success in the 19-teens, but World War I killed the price of copper. Then the Great Depression came along in the 1920s. It was never really profitable outside of a few years. Up this way was the site of the general manager's house, which was the biggest and most extravagant house in town. It even had a tennis court. But as we can see, there isn't much left of it now. I saw a picture in a newspaper from the late 1940s, and it was still standing then, so I'm not sure when it came down, but yeah, there isn't much left now. I was hoping we could at least make out where the tennis court was. And here is what's left of the general manager's garage. I see a sign on top of this hill. Let's check it out, but there's a pipe. This town did have running water and electricity. Water was pumped from the Bill Williams River, which is about 3 miles north of here. I should mention the road out here got pretty rough at the end. Pretty much the upper limit of what I'd want to put my Subaru Crosstrek through. And it looks like this was the site of the school. Well, there's not much left, but they sure had a great view. Well, maybe not such a great view after all. It looks like the school is above a dump and where the runoff from the mining would go. Or maybe this is what's left of the school. There's a lot of wood laying around here. I did read one story that one year as the population of the town declined, they didn't have enough students for the school to remain open. And they were going to have to send the remaining kids to another town to go to school. So what they did is they enrolled a 5-year-old into the first grade so they would meet that quota so the school could remain open. But let's head to these ruins over here. So here are the ruins of some of the company housing. Unlike the general manager who got a huge house with a tennis court, the people actually working the mines didn't really live that well, but they were given housing. Most of the miners would have been Mexican nationals that they brought in to work the mines, or Native Americans from the Colorado River area. Basically anyone they could get to work cheaply. We'll check out some of the mines later, but mining was definitely not an easy job, and not one that paid well. With these houses being made out of adobe, unfortunately there's not much left of them. The adobe just kind of melts away anytime it rains. This house actually has a wall still standing. It looks like probably the bathroom, as there's a pipe sticking out of the ground. I mentioned earlier that the water was pumped from the Bill Williams River, which is about 3 miles or so north of here. That river was dammed in the 1960s, so it doesn't have year-round water anymore. This building still has its wooden window frames, which is a rare sight for ruins like this. What I don't see is a spot for a bathroom or any plumbing, so they probably all shared the bathroom from that other building. The wooden window frames are missing from this one. But this is pretty interesting over here. You can still see some of the old wooden floor. It looks like there could have been a basement under there, but it's all filled in now. Let's head back up and check out some of the mining operation. The mining here was pretty extensive, and there are mine shafts all over the place. This is where a water tank for the mines was located. And most of the mine shafts around here are gated over like this one. One of these shafts is said to be 1,200 feet deep, and I'm not sure how trustworthy this cage is, so we're just going to take a look from the side. The last thing I want is to walk out there and end up 1,200 feet underground. Plus I have the car keys in my pocket, and I'm sure my wife doesn't want to walk back to town. It's hard to see through the grate, but this thing is pretty deep. I can't see the bottom. This is where the hoist would have been. And then if we turn around, there's the shaft. I'm not sure what this is or was. There's a sign on it. The sign is covering up whatever it used to say above Swansea. And it has a little door, but it doesn't look like anything's in there. And the door doesn't open. Here's another mine shaft to check out. In all, 27 million pounds of copper were taken out of this area while the mines were in operation. So while this place wasn't very profitable, it did produce a lot of copper. I've been seeing this large building off in the distance for a while, and I've been anxious to get over and check that out, so let's head over there next. In a bit of non-mining history from this town, Swansea played a big role in the disputed Arizona governor race of 1916 that was decided by only a few votes. It was believed Thomas Campbell defeated the incumbent governor George Hunt by only 30 votes, and Campbell served as governor for most of 1917 while Hunt challenged the election results. An investigation found problems here in Swansea. First, a man who was too drunk to vote was assisted by an election marshal. Then a clerk went absent for 2 hours, during which time 28 out of the 63 people who voted weren't actually registered voters. The Arizona Supreme Court later ruled that Hunt actually won the election by 43 votes, and he was reinstated as governor. And check this place out. This massive building was a dust chamber, which is part of the smelting process for the ore. This building's pretty impressive in its size and the brickwork, but it's just another example of how they were building things to impress investors rather than practical things to help the mining operation. Because of building things like this out here in the middle of nowhere, there was no way this mine was going to be profitable. It would have been far easier and cheaper just to ship the ore elsewhere for the processing. Because of this fence, we can't really get any closer, but we can take a look from above. There are a lot of spots out here where you could tell there used to be something, but here, nearly 100 years later, there are just a pile of bricks. It looks like this is called Water Tank Hill, but the water tank is long gone. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this is where the power plant was. And this sign here answered my question. This was the power plant. The machine shop was over here. It looks like there used to be railroad tracks that would lead this way. Let's walk down the tracks and see what we can see. I'll get into the railroad in just a little bit once we get closer to the old railroad station, but there's kind of a funny story of why there are no tracks out here anymore. When the railroad out here shut down in 1937 and the mining closed, the remaining employees cut up all the steel in the railroad, sold the materials to recover lost wages, and then left the area. And here's what's left of the machine shop. I'm pretty surprised at how big this place is. You could wander around here all day and not see everything. There's stuff down below us, stuff above us. Pretty much everywhere you look, there's something to see. But I guess had they not built this place to impress investors rather than run a successful mining company, that probably wouldn't be the case. So it looks like this is the reverberatory furnace. And this thing is huge. Let's take a closer look. We've moved down to the furnace, and I thought this brick was cool because you could still see some of the brickmaker's name on it. But I'm not sure how well it shows up on the camera yet because of the wide-angle lens. But on the back wall, there's something written in brick. And there are just bricks everywhere. This probably would have been a really impressive looking building before it was destroyed. And it looks like it says, number 1 reverberatory. Pretty much everywhere you walk around here is the byproduct of the mining. I can't even imagine working here 100+ years ago and just breathing this stuff in all day long, every day. Here's what's left of the railroad scales. We're coming up to the old railroad station now, which surprisingly still has most of its walls. So in 1907, the Arizona and California Railroad was complete between Wickenburg and Parker. Then in 1910, a 21-mile-long branch line, the Arizona and Swansea Railroad, was built extending from Bouse to Swansea. The railroad was owned by George Mitchell, and he retained control of it even after the Clara Gold and Copper Company went bankrupt in 1912. And check out this handprint on the wall. Actually, there's 2 of them. It looks like in 1910, someone left their mark on this place. So even though he was no longer involved in the mining, Mitchell still owned the railroad. He ended up suing the new investors, and then in 1917, the Clark Copper interests, who also owned mines near Jerome, Arizona, purchased the railroad from Mitchell. You can still make out the old railroad bed here. When the Clark Copper interests purchased the railroad, they had also purchased part of the road between San Diego and Yuma, and they hoped to extend the road from Yuma to Swansea in order to be able to get copper to the ports in San Diego. It, of course, never happened. And after selling the railroad, Mitchell left for Los Angeles. Driving back to the main part of town from the railroad station, I saw a sign kind of hidden out here, so I wanted to stop and check it out and see what it is. You see cans everywhere. And I need to watch where I'm going as well. I almost ended up in the cans. So it looks like this is where the dairy was, if you can imagine a bunch of cows out here. And I think I found where they disposed of all the glass bottles. I've been kind of saving the most intact buildings for last, which are these workers' cabins across the way. These workers' cabins were built in 1917, and they have been partially restored. For example, the roofs aren't original. Now, I read somewhere that each one would have 6 to 8 people living in them. And you can see the bed frame is still left in this one, but can you imagine 6 to 8 people living in this small space? In 1918, the Spanish flu tore through the town, and I imagine having people living so crammed together did not help matters. I saw one report that the town sent a telegram that said 32 cases of the flu, rapidly spreading, send 10 cases of whiskey. There are supposedly 2 cemeteries for the town. We did see one as we came into town, but that one only has 1 grave that is still marked, and it's for an infant. This building still has some of the wooden floor left. Can you imagine 6 to 8 people living in each of these cabins? For the most part, mining back then was a hard, short life. There are some more mines across the way. Most of the mines out here are gated up, but these ones aren't for some reason. But I'm not crazy enough to go into an abandoned mine. I think I've seen 3 or 4 old cars left around out here. I was going to make a "this town has everything but the kitchen sink" joke, but I think this is actually a stove. Mining here ended for good in the 1940s, but the town was dead long before that. The post office closed in 1924, and the 1930 census listed no one here. So that's our look at the ghost town of Swansea, Arizona. If you decide to come out here yourself, make sure to give yourself ample time because this place is huge. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.